All right, well, let's go ahead and start. Welcome everybody to UPAA Live. I feel kind of awkward up here because I'm introducing myself. We don't have a host, so this is me. And I hope it's helpful. I've learned a lot of cool things. And with the new features with Camera RAW, I'm not a Lightroom user, so I don't know how these translate over to Lightroom. So with that, let's go ahead and start. And I'm going to put this on Do Not Disturb, and it keeps turning back on, but we'll see if it works. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. Again, welcome everyone. We are going to go over, basically, I'm going to go over some of the new features that have come out in Camera RAW, just some general basic editing. And then kind of the philosophy, my philosophy behind editing. So I'm going to start out talking about one of the coolest things that I feel will completely change my life. And that is an adaptive ISO preset. And if you guys have any questions, we have a pretty small group. I think we can go ahead and interrupt, or you can put them in the comments and our student Donovan will kind of be moderating that. So if you have any questions, or also if you know how to do something a different way, or you feel that there's a way that you can do it better, hey, I'm all ears for hearing that. So first off, let's start with ISO adaptive preset. So the reason why this I absolutely love, well, I'm just gonna open these images up into Photoshop real fast. So I just took two images in my office, and one I shot at ISO 400, and then the other one I shot at 10,000. So obviously when you're shooting at 10,000 ISO, you're going to get a lot of digital noise as opposed to shooting at 400, right? There's just a ton of noise in there. And then when I'm editing, I'll usually go into detail and noise reduction, and I'll manually slide that for photos that that are shot with a really high ISO, just to kind of get rid of that noise. But sometimes there's situations where I'm shooting at different ISOs during an event or during a game. So for example, like a football game, there may be times where I'm at 100 ISO, and then by the end of the game, my ISO is switched up to almost 10,000 or 8,000. And when I'm going through editing, I hate having to kind of look up and see what my ISO is and then batch process for that section. So what adaptive ISO does is you can give Camera RAW 2 reference points. And with those reference points, you can say, all right, if my ISO is at 400, I want you to apply no noise reduction. And then if your ISO is up to 10,000, you can set it whatever you want. I want it to apply this much noise reduction. And then you can set it so every time you open up images in Camera RAW, that preset automatically happens. And it will, based on the parameters that you give it, it will adjust that noise reduction slider in between those parameters, depending on what your ISO is. So super easy how to do it. So again, I have my two, you need at least 2 points of reference. So my one for 400 ISO, you see right up here, and then 10,000 ISO. So my 400 ISO, I'm not going to touch because I want that at 0. So my 10,000, I'm going to put that at 50. And just generally, right, when here's my like cabinet with photos of me and my wife. So generally when I'm doing my noise reduction, I don't want to do it so it looks plastic and fake, right? I still want a little bit of digital noise. 10,000 is pretty high. So rarely will I ever go over 50. So at 10,000, that's pretty, I don't know if I really shoot over 10,000 very much. So I'm just going to keep it at 50 for 10,000. Select both images. And this will be up on the page too. So if you're not following the steps or not taking notes, you can follow it later when it's up on the YouTube page, or you can just go to Adobe's site and it walks you through it. So select both of the images after your ISO, your noise reduction is set. And then I'm going to go to my presets tab and I'm going to create a preset. And I'm just going to call it adaptive ISO. And I'm going to uncheck all, and I'm just going to check the detail. And you want to make sure down at the bottom here, create ISO adaptive preset is checked. Then hit OK. Oh, there we go. I already have one on there. I didn't delete it. All right. So the presets here. Now you'll go up to the little cog up here, the preferences. You can hit Command K or click that. You're going to go to raw defaults. And then, so I'm going to go to choose preset, user presets, adaptive ISO. And then I'm going to create default. So what that does, every time I open up any image into Camera RAW, that ISO will automatically adjust based off of what you shot it at, which makes it so nice. One thing to notice is this is camera specific, which I think is really nice, because if you're shooting with an old 1DX Mark I or 5D Mark II, your ISO is going to handle differently than if you're shooting with an R5 or an R3 if you're a Canon shooter. I don't really know the Nikon cameras, but and so I'm going to hit OK. So that works. But the important part is I'm going to open up these now. So this was shot with the 1DX Mark III and this was shot with an R3. So open those up. And if you notice, probably because I didn't delete it, my preset before, the noise reduction, if I did it right, this wouldn't have applied already. But if you notice in the noise reduction, it adjusts according to, this is 6400, 3200, and my slider automatically moves based off of what my ISO is. Now, if you have multiple cameras that you're using, just open up the images in Camera RAW and you'll go back to your raw defaults. So now I have 3 cameras to choose from. So I'm going to go to my R3 adaptive ISO preset, create default. I'm going to do that for the 1DX Mark III as well, create default, hit OK. So anytime I import those images from those cameras, it will automatically adjust, which is, for me, oh man, that will save so much time and be a beautiful thing. Any questions on that? I know that was kind of a quick run through. So that's one of the features that Camera RAW has come out with a little while ago that I think is unbelievable. I am going to have one of our students come in here and talk about some of the masking features in just a second. As he's walking in, this is just a side note. I have learned that, or kind of we've learned that space, hard drive space, server space is really, really important. And for example, we're using our brands, Photo Shelter Brands website, and we've been uploading like our full size edited JPEGs from the R5. So you're having like 25 megabyte JPEGs that we're uploading, and we're running out of space so fast. So a couple of things. One, from the research that I've done, I've found that shooting in CRAW or compressed RAW, there is really no visible difference in your files, like from your camera. And that saves quite a bit of space on our server. And then we started saving our images to 5 megabyte files. So for example, if I'm opening this up in here and I choose to save, you can click down here, limit file size to 5000K. So instead of having a 25 megabyte file, you're limiting it to a 5 megabyte file. So the cool thing about this is, one, it saves a ton of space. Two, you cannot tell the difference in image quality. If you compare the images side by side from your 25 megabyte file and your 5 megabyte file. And I didn't prepare this to show you guys, but I can do that later, or you can ask for examples. But if you compare them side by side, you may notice little grain digital noise shifting, but overall detail, you cannot tell. I also printed a small section or an 8 by 10 section of a 20 by 30 print, and printed one full resolution, printed one 5 megabytes, and then printed one 1 megabyte file. The 1 megabyte file, you could start to see the image falling apart a little bit more, but you cannot see a difference between a 5 megabyte file and your full res file. So just something like, if you're running out of space and you're paying way too much money for online storage, that's something that you can be aware of to kind of help manage and save that space. So one of our students, Donovan, is going to jump in, and he is going to go over some of the things that he uses the new features in Camera RAW for. And then I'm just going to go over 4 images afterwards and kind of go through the editing process. And yeah, so here's Donovan.
Hello, everybody. As Nate said, I'm Donovan. I'm one of the student employees here at BYU Photo. And Nate wanted me to go over, just briefly, some of the new masking options in Camera RAW in Photoshop. So as you can see kind of on my screen here a little bit, I'm a product photographer. I really like to shoot objects. And I work a lot with a specific small goods company called Bamware. So those are most of my photo examples today, but I'm going to pull these into Photoshop and kind of show you what masking options I do and how I found them useful, and hopefully whatever I show you today can be something that you guys can find useful as well. So let me go over here. So if you go to the masking options in Photoshop in Camera RAW, you see that there's some new options right here. So they have subject selection, sky selection, background selection, but then they've also added objects selection, and then they've added color range and luminance range, and they've adjusted those for accuracy, which is awesome. Nate will take you a little bit more through, oh, and they've also added people selection. That's, I think, here in subject selection as well. Nate will go through some of those other settings with you. I'm mainly going to show you background selection, subject selection, object selection, and kind of the difference between them and what I use them for. So for example, I have this photo shoot for this company, and they wanted all of their products photographed really nice and even on a white background. And so you can see here I have a couple different shots and just angles of the product. And I've made some adjustments to the pictures, but not anything major. So one of the things that I really love using for these kinds of photos, so if I go to the masking options and I select a background, Photoshop will actually go through and select everything that is not my subject, which is really nice when your subject is isolated on a nice white background, a nice black background. They're easy to separate from everything else in the frame. And so I am able to select this background, and then I can just crank my exposure and my whites, and I'll turn on my my clipping there so you can see that. Everything in red is blown out to full white or paper-based white, or however you want to call it. So now my background is complete white, and it's set up really well for a website. It's just nice and clean, helps separate your subject, right? Another awesome thing about the masking updates in Camera RAW is that if I go to sync my settings with these other pictures, I can actually sync my masking options as well. And instead of Photoshop just taking, the square crop or the square mask from this specific photo and copying and pasting it everywhere, the AI will update across every photo and reselect the subject or reselect the background and adjust for each picture. So I can kind of show you what that looks like. So if I hit OK, I already have masks on there. So I'm just going to hit replace. And you'll see that it says, it was updating the settings. It may take a little bit of time. If you do that across a lot of photos, it may take a second. But now if I go back to the masking options in here, you'll see right here, it selected the background again. And it's not perfect every time, right? It selected this little part of my wallet. And so I could go through, with a brush and, say, I don't want to select that part, and I can get rid of it. And then I have my whole wallet again there. But then it did it here too, missed that one little spot, but it got everything else and it updated across all of my photos that I wanted it to update on. So that is a super useful feature if you're trying to batch edit and you want to mask your subject a little bit and maybe make them brighter, or darken your background a little bit. That is a great setting to use in the new Camera RAW features, is just being able to sync your masks and have the AI automatically update that for you across all your images. So that's kind of what background selection looks like, and that's what syncing your settings, your masks looks like. One of the other masks I use fairly often is color range and luminance range also. So I just turned off the couple masks that I did have. One of the ones that I made was just a nice linear gradient to try to brighten up a darker part of the shoe. But if I'm looking at an image or looking at my subject and I want certain colors to pop more, and I don't want to have to go through with my brush and paint it in on every single photo, you can select the color range. And let's say I want to adjust the blue on this shoe and make it brighter and make it pop more. I can select the color of the shoe, and you can see that it selected everything in this image that was blue. And then on the right side over here, you can refine it. So if I want to have it select more blue and I want the blue range to be wider, I can make that possible. Or if I want to really nail down just one specific color and maybe my brush is just not going to work for it, I can nail that down so you can see it mainly just grabbed here. I just want to leave it at 50 for sake of the demo. But if you look at this now, you can see the blue on the shoe pops a whole lot more on the inside with the cushioning. It pops a little bit on the logo here, and then the Nike swoosh and even the sole of the shoe pops out a little bit more just by upping my brightness. Maybe you could add some contrast into it. But just really simply and really quickly, I've taken my photo from here where the blue's a little bit dark, kind of hard to see, to here where now the color's a little bit more vibrant. And that was just a 20-second edit with a mask. So that's another great option if you need to adjust colors, or like I said, luminance, your brightness. If you have a part of your image that's really blown out, you can select that and take highlights down or bring shadows up. That's a really great feature as well. I use that quite a bit. So the last thing I'll show you, and then I'll hand the computer back to Nate because he's the master editor. I'm just going to show you the difference really quick between subject selection, object selection, and background selection. So if you don't have everything, if you don't have your subject perfectly isolated on a nice black or white background, and you have more, not chaos in the frame, but you have more things in the frame, it's a little busier than just maybe a nice studio photo. I wanted to show you how good Photoshop's AI is at this. So if I hit select subject, Photoshop is going to detect what it thinks your subject is in the picture, and it's going to create a mask for that. So if I hit select subject, you'll see, oh, and I've got my settings saved from the last one. So you'll see here with the red that Photoshop selected the case that this watch was in, and it selected the watch, and it did a pretty nice job. The edges on that are really, really crisp. There's a little bit of, fading, or it's not super sharp right down here where the grass blends. You can see it got this blade of grass here and here. So it wasn't totally perfect, but that was a really easy way of just selecting my subject, and now I can just make it a little bit brighter. I can add more contrast to it. I can make my adjustments there. So there's the subject selection. If I do background selection, it will kind of select everything the opposite of the subject selection. That's what I've noticed personally. You can see that it feathers off a little bit more here on the case. It didn't do as good of a job outlining this little watch case. But if you just need to darken your background a little bit to help your subject stand out, and you don't totally crush your edit and make it super obvious that, you know, you're masking and doing some really crazy stuff. That is a really easy way for you to draw a little bit more attention to your subject just by selecting everything outside of it and bringing down the exposure just a little bit.
Hey, Donovan.
Yeah, what's up?
I don't know if you're planning on doing this. Could you also show how you can edit your mask with your adjustment brush?
Oh yeah, sure. I'll do it on this next one. So let's
Great.
do object selection really fast. So object selection is really nice if on a photo like this, or even on a sports photo, you want to just select one part of the image. Maybe you want to select the ball in a photo, or you want to select an athlete, and subject selection isn't doing it well for you. People selection hasn't been working great either. You can actually do object selection. So if I go here to select objects, Photoshop will give me a brush that I can then use to paint what I want my object to be. So just for, you know, keeping the example clean, I left out that part in the middle, but you can see that object selection did a really good job of getting the edge of this as well. It's still feathered off on the edge a tiny bit, and that's okay. But the subject selection and object selection are hit and miss, and that's why I use them so interchangeably. Now, let's say you want to do, like on this particular photo, let's say I want to just select the watch on the inside. I don't want the case. I just want to select the watch face, the band, maybe the dials here on the side. I go to object selection, make my brush a little bit smaller. You don't have to be perfect with it because Photoshop's doing a great job at selecting the edges. And if I just outline the watch here, this is a little bit therapeutic for me. I like just to paint in all my stuff. I feel like Bob Ross when I do that with photos. Okay, so now I've done my selection on my watch. You can see that it actually did really well over here with the knobs. There's a little bit, you know, I could take a brush and subtract and clean this up a bit. You can see up here, it got kind of into the case. It couldn't tell as easily where the watch band ended and the case began. So it masked that a little bit. Same thing down here. It just was a little bit hard for the software to kind of tell that. But overall, if I just want to mask the watch, I mean, that's a solid 90% mask. I just have to go in here and do a little bit of cleanup. So if you make a mask and it's, you know, it's obviously not going to be perfect. Sometimes it's just flawless and you don't have to do anything, but odds are you might have to do some adjustments. So if you have to, you can go down here to add, and you can either paint back exposure in, you can paint and make your mask a little bit bigger. You can subtract it. I could do that here with this image. So let's say I want to get rid of this spot up here. I hit subtract and I can go back through and kind of fix that mask a little bit and tell it not to grab the bottom of the case. So now it mainly is just the watch. You can kind of see those adjustments there, right? It kind of feathers off a little bit there now rather than grabbing the inside of the case. You can also subtract subjects or backgrounds, people. Those are really nice as well. You can do the same thing. You can add additional masks into this. And so you can have everything just on that one layer. And I found those incredibly useful as I do product work, even as I do sports photography work here at BYU Photo. If I need to just mask a football player, the select people does great. Object selection does great when I'm trying to select maybe the ball flying through a frame, or I'm just trying to tone other things down in my image. I really love the new masking options in Camera RAW. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them either in the chat or right now, or you can ask Nate as he kind of continues to go through these a little bit more in depth from what I've done. But if you haven't been using these, I highly recommend you do it because it has saved me a lot of time trying to get photos toned the way that I want to. So I'll turn the time back over to Nate.
Awesome. Thanks, Donovan. So one of the nice things about having students work for us is they keep us updated on different things that happen and new updates. They keep me on my toes. They keep me learning. And so yeah, love it. I think Donovan was probably he was on board with this a lot faster than I was, because I I like doing things kind of the old fashioned way, something that I'm comfortable with. I like to have more control. I like to do those really fine-tuned edits in Photoshop. But one of the nice things Camera Raw, I feel, is making it possible to do most things without having to open images in Photoshop. So yeah, let's go on. I'm pulling the chat up. I'll put it over to the side. All right, let's go through. I have these 4 images up. Let's go through, and I'm just going to go through. You guys, okay, I don't want to say there's not a wrong way to edit. There's definitely wrong ways to edit. What I'm trying to say is there are multiple ways to edit photos. This is just my style. This is what I like to do. This is what works for me. It's not the end all best way to do things. And to be honest, like I barely scratch the surface of, I think, what these programs can do, but it works for me. And so I'm just going to talk through my editing philosophy, things that I do. So take it for what it is. If it's helpful, great. If you disagree with me, that's fine. If you have a better way, I want to know about it. Okay, so campus photo, let's start with that. Kind of my go-to. This is just what I do. So I'm going to come in naturally. I'm just going to add some contrast. I'm going to pull down my highlights and I'm going to bump up my shadows. That's kind of one of the first things that I do with my images. And some of you guys have probably seen some of the videos that we put out before on editing. I've found, like with the R5, it by default adds a little bit too much magenta. So I'm going to pull that down a little bit. I'm going to fix my crop. Okay, one of the principles of cropping or just shooting in general, and I ask our students this all the time when we're going over photos. One is, what do you want people to look at? What did you take the picture of? All right, what do you want people to see? So, I mean, this one's obvious. This is, our alumni building. This is where our office is. We're in the basement, back corner over here. And so I want people to see the building. I mean, this is obvious. Now, the second follow-up question is, are there any elements to this photo that are distracting? And if there are, how can I minimize or eliminate that distraction? So this is taking a nice photo one step further. And honestly, the best thing to do is while you're shooting, kind of go through that process. Okay, what am I seeing? Why am I taking this photo? What is it about this image that captures me? And then from there, are there any elements in my viewfinder that distract me from seeing that? And if so, can I eliminate it or minimize it? And that could be, well, maybe I should use a different focal length. It could be, well, let me take 2 steps to the left and that will get rid of this thing in the background. So one of the elements in this image that is very distracting to me is the sign right over here. So applying what I said, how can I eliminate or minimize that distraction? Well, I'm just going to crop it out. Then I don't have to worry about it. And it's not taking away any element that is a huge contributor to the image, right? So like the tree over here, you can still see the branches. It's not like cutting that tree out. It's like, well, I don't even know what I'm looking at anymore. It doesn't add enough to the image that taking it out ruins the image. Does that make sense? But taking that sign out to the side really enhances the image, or at least gets rid of that distraction. Okay, from here, so I added contrast. And you guys, I say this cautiously, don't be afraid of adding contrast to your image. I see so many images that just look really, really flat. Don't be afraid of it. That being said, don't overdo it either. It just takes practice of getting to know what looks right and what doesn't. And especially when I was younger and I was learning Photoshop and I was learning new things, I would find something that I get really excited about. And I'm not saying contrast is something that we get excited about. Maybe I get excited about it. But then I would go way overboard. I think I remember the first time I found the saturation tab, right? When I'm like, holy cow, look at these colors. And I'm like cranking that thing. And you look back and you're like, that is the stupidest choice you could have made. But I was so excited at that moment. So kind of a rule of thumb that I have is when I find something new and exciting, I'll do it to what I think is right. And then I dial it back 50% because odds are I'm overdoing it. So that's kind of a rule of thumb that I do. So don't be afraid of contrast. I'm taking my highlights down because I want to kind of pull more detail back into the sky and into the snow. And then this is personal preference. I'm going to add a little bit of clarity and texture. You can kind of see as I zoom in. Just kind of what it does. The texture just kind of gives it a little bit more, I don't know, sharpness and clarity. I don't even know what terms I would use to describe what it does. Just play around with it so you get comfortable and familiar with it. I do want the colors to pop more. And so vibrance and saturation, I don't know if you guys know the main difference, at least for me. So vibrance, I'll use that generally when there's people in the frame because your vibrance will not affect your skin tones as much as saturation. Saturation affects everything. Vibrance probably leaves out more of your oranges for skin tones, but it also affects colors differently as well. So you can kind of pick what you want to do. So here you can see it really pops the blues, but not a ton of the building as opposed to like saturation makes it a lot more orange. So I'm just going to bump up the colors a little bit. I'm going to bring up my exposure because I want to expose more for the building. Now let's go into the masking options that Donovan talked about earlier. So there's two ways to do that. Well, there's more than two, but here's two ways that you can do it. So selecting sky. So I click that. You can click show overlay, so it shows where your mask is, or take it off. So it did pretty well. I mean, you can see where it blends into the building a little bit, right? And you can refine that selection if you want. But I want the sky to be a little bit darker, and so I can drag that down, right? You can go extreme and make it nighttime if you want, but you'll definitely have to refine your mask. But if I just want to take the exposure down a little bit just to reclaim those highlights, you can't even really tell what it's doing to the building, right? And so that's one way to kind of bring back your skies. You do see a little bit of haloing over where the tree is. So that's one way to kind of recover your sky. Another way, and I'm still pretty sold on this one. I still think I like it more than subject select because I love to use graduated filters. And so you do the linear gradient and then you can click and drag. And then it's more of a gradual gradient. I mean, that's what it's called, a graduated filter. And so you can do that without actually shooting with a graduated filter. And the nice thing about that too, and you can do this with your sky as well, but then I'm going to warm up the clouds just a little bit. And then you don't have to worry about kind of the haloing or different things. And it's just really super subtle. The other thing that I want to talk about philosophy-wise with editing is you are the director of the image. And so my job as a photographer and when I'm working with the images in post-processing is I want to direct people to see what I want them to see without them realizing that's what I'm doing, if that makes sense. I want it to be super easy for their eye to go straight to the place that I want them to look. And I'm directing them there through my edit and through my shooting without them even realizing it. So one, don't do things that are heavy-handed. Be really subtle about things. One of the things that you can do in this situation is I'm just going to do a slight vignette. So I'll just take it down a little bit. So your midpoint, I'm going to go extreme so you guys can see what it's doing if you haven't used the vignette yet. Vignette, yeah, that was good. So bringing your midpoint, you're just kind of bringing how far that vignette goes into your frame. And then feather, right? You can make it super hard or feathered quite a bit. So typically I feather it 100%. I bring my midpoint in, and I'm definitely not going to vignette that much, but I'm just going to do it slightly. I'm actually going to bring that over just a little bit more. So the tower's almost kind of in the third. I don't know. Maybe I like it the other way better. Yeah. Okay. So this honestly, if you're comfortable with it and you're going through, this can be like a 5-second edit. And just taking that little bit of time, you can see the huge difference that makes.
Hey,
All
we
right.
got some good comments in the chat right now. One of the ones that I see right here is saying that you can combine the sky selection and the linear gradient to get the best of both worlds.
Oh, I like that. I haven't tried that yet.
The other suggestion that was in the chat as well is that you can, when you make either your sky selection or your gradual filter, like your linear gradient, you can subtract the subject from that linear gradient to help clean up the building or clean up your subject.
Love it. See, great ideas. I haven't even thought about that. Haven't tried it. So great. Appreciate it.
We have one more question though for you, Nate. It comes from Sarah. I struggle with getting skin tones and white balance right because of our gym lighting. So what in order would you recommend adjusting white balance, HSL, luminance, and calibration? I usually start with white balance, but I'm wondering if there's a better way.
Hey, Sarah, that's a great question. So I'm going to talk about white balance in one of the other photos. And if I don't answer that question when we get there, please bring it back up. And I don't know if it'll completely answer it, but we're definitely going to be talking about white balance a little bit later. So don't let me forget if I forget. But great questions, great and suggestions. I appreciate that. So yeah, so you're talking about, we can go up, we can do subject select where we.
So Nate, if
select
you actually go
subject.
into your first mask with your
Oh
linear
yeah,
gradient,
go into the first mask.
yeah, you can hit subtract and select the subject from there.
Yeah,
as
there we
well.
go. There we go. And then that'll take the building out. Great, love it. Great suggestions. All right. Let's go to, we'll just go to the next one, just go in order. Man, here's a plug for, if you guys have not been to Cambodia, oh man, you have to go. That was a bucket list place I did not know existed for me. So we went with a nonprofit group that started here at BYU, Neonatal Rescue, and then a couple of our nursing students went over with them. Anyway, this was a part where we went sightseeing in Siem Reap, and this is one of the temples there, Angkor Wat. It was, oh my goodness, I would go on vacation there anytime. It was amazing. So with that, oh, actually, I'm going to go back here and let's go back to our HSL slider. So color mixer, HSL. So I don't know if you guys use this a lot or at all. So your HSL sliders are super powerful. Let's say I want my blues to be a little bit more on the green side or a little bit more on the purple side. So you can just click and drag, right there for your hue, saturation. Maybe I don't want my blues quite as blue, or I want them more, or your oranges, right? You can drag those down so the bricks don't pop so much. So really powerful tools, or I want the bricks darker, or I want them lighter. The other cool thing is the little color picker right here. So you can click on that and actually sample a specific color and then click and drag. So I'm on my luminance right now. So I can make my blues brighter or darker, or I can go to saturation and click on it and then desaturate those blues a little bit more, or saturate them, or the bricks. Or I can click on it and change the hue, right? So I want those bricks a little bit more red or whatever it is. So that's a really powerful tool just to play around with. Okay, so going back here. So normally, first thing I would do is I'm going to hit A or go to my crop and then the straighten tool. And I'm going to fix my horizon, right? So it's straight. But instead of doing that this time, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the geometry tab. So if there's straight lines that this can pull from, it's great. You can use auto and it will kind of do its own thing. Or if you want more control, you can focus on just your horizontal lines, just your vertical lines, or it'll take a combination of both, or you can actually draw your own guides. So for example, I'm going to go in and I'm just going to take this line off the stairs. I'm going to take this line off the top of that doorway. And then I'm just going to follow this wall down. And I hope that these walls are, I'm not a builder contractor, is a plumb, true, you know, one of those. Anyway, so now my image is a lot more exactly symmetrical. So that nice tool is there. So again, I'm going to go to, well, let's look at this. Remember what we did earlier with our noise reduction. So automatically set it to 22 because my ISO is at 1600. Love it. Don't have to go there ever again. Okay, again, I'm going to add contrast. I'm going to bring the highlights down just a little bit. Shadows up. I want more detail. Bring my exposure up a little bit. I feel like the image is a little bit too orange. So I'm going to, you know, take my white balance down. Or not my, yeah, I'm going to change my color temperature, bring it down a little bit to make it cool. And then we'll do some vignetting, same things that we did earlier. We talked about just to bring your eye in. So just a couple changes made that image, you know, pop just a little bit more. So now let's go through and we're going to talk about some of the selections again and how they can enhance in this. So if we do subject select, show overlay, so you'll notice here it also got up in this area up here in the walkway. And then, you know, it's kind of fuzzy down below here by his feet. It's hard to tell. So you can go in and you can refine that. So that's your subject. And then you can do the background. And you see it did pretty good, but it's kind of bleeding over onto him and his feet. So I'm not going to use that one. So let's see how the object select does. So I'm just going to get my brush and kind of paint around him, one of the monks walking around. And here's the funny thing that I found out, you know, we see all these National Geographic photos of these monks in these really cool places. Yeah, what I learned while I was there is this is not where they practice or like they're sightseeing just the same that we are. Like they're not there worshiping or praying like maybe I'm the only one that thought this, but I'm like, oh man, this is their monastery. This is where they hang out. No, they're sightseeing. They're walking around with their cameras. They're taking selfies. Like it's pretty funny. Anyway, so you can see that the object select actually worked really, really well, a lot better. You know, it got a little bit up in there, but overall in this situation, the object select did pretty good, you know, a little bit down by the feet. So let's say I really want those oranges to pop, but I want the background a little bit more desaturated. So a couple ways you can do that. Well, let's just do that. You can invert the mask. So now we're selecting the background instead. And then I'm just going to take my saturation down, right? You can, I would say, please don't ever do this where you just have the one color pop and the red rose. If you do it, make sure it's intentional and make sure that there's a really good reason for it. Otherwise, just avoid doing that. Maybe I'll give away my UPAA voting secret, but if I ever see that on the monthly image competition, unless it's done really well, I'll probably give it a 1 star. Anyway, so yeah, take that down a little bit, and then the oranges still pop, and you're desaturating it, and then from there, so there's kind of your difference before and after. Another cool tool that's been given is you go to your healing brush or your healing feature. They now have, there's your healing brush, there's your clone stamp. You guys are probably familiar with those. And then Photoshop's been doing a lot more with content aware. There's actually a content aware brush, which is super nice. So let's say we want to get rid of this sign. So I'm just going to draw over this sign. And then content aware will do its best to do its thing. You're like, well, yeah, it didn't really do that great. So in that situation, you can still go back. It got rid of most of it, right? The floor looks pretty good over here on the wall. There's just some different parts that are not good. So that's when I'll go in for my healing brush. So if you don't know the difference, your healing brush and your clone stamp. Clone stamp is literally going to take a section and copy and paste exactly what is there, right? No blending at all. And then the difference with that, well, as opposed to your healing brush actually tries to blend. So I'm just going to paint this in. And then it's going to select something that it thinks that you'll want, and you can move it around. Okay, so I'm going to pick there, and I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to get rid of that. But it blends it a lot more. It's a lot more like you have more control over it. And instead of being an exact copy and paste, it tries to blend it for you. So that's pretty good. I'd probably go in and fine tune it more. So yeah, there's any questions so far? We good? All right, moving on. Okay, so here's a lab photo. Photographed the other week. They were actually making their own drifting trikes. So they were cutting up old bikes and making their own drifting trikes. So I'm like, man, I want to take that class. So I'm going to go in. So let's talk about white balance a little bit. And this is something that Jaron showed me that he, I don't know if he stumbled across it or on accident or saw somebody do it. So you have your color picker, right? Where you can pick something that you think is neutral or white, right? And it will, like if you pick something that's red, right, it's going to make more green in there. But if you pick something neutral, it's kind of going to, you know, adjust accordingly. But the cool thing that I didn't realize is you can click and drag and it will take an average of the white balance in that frame and set it accordingly. Now, I don't know why. Sometimes when I click and drag, at least on this image, it turns it green. I have no idea why it does that. I don't think it typically does that for other images, but if you click and drag kind of a neutral area, it'll take an average of the white balance and do it for you. I'm like, oh my goodness, that's amazing. So if you're struggling finding a nice white balance, that's a great option. Or, you know, these are good presets that are starting. So if you're in a setting where it's fluorescent light, so this has fluorescent light, but when I was taking the pictures, I mean, you have these beautiful bank of windows, just turn those overheads off. So then you don't have a mixed light. You're not worrying about it. So that's really nice with white balance. So again, I'm going to add my contrast. I'm going to bring my highlights down a little bit, bring my shadows up, add a little bit of clarity, a little bit of texture. Obviously, I don't want to overdo it. That looks awful. So I'm just adding a tiny bit, a little bit of vignetting, bring my midpoint in, feathering out. And that looks, you know, that looks pretty good for me. Maybe I'll bring my vibrance up a little bit. I kind of like the desaturated look in here. So I think that this looks good, but then the problem is if you zoom in, you have chromatic aberration. And I don't know how many of you guys are aware of chromatic aberration, but you'll have these purple or blue or green or magenta lines. And for the most part, Camera RAW, I think by default takes care of it. So if you go to optics, right, on profile, remove chromatic aberration. So this is without it on. You click it on. And then if you can also do profile corrections for specific lenses, right, where it fixes the distortion and the vignetting and different things. But I still have purple on the edges here, and I still have a little bit of the, you know, blue, green over here. So I'm going to go over to manual. And then Here, there's a couple ways to do it. You can sample the fringe. So I can get the little color picker and I can go over to the purple and click on that, and it will automatically adjust this slider to where that color picker goes. And you can expand that too. So if there's a range of your chromatic aberration, so you just get the color picker, go over there, and then you can adjust the amount that it goes. And it is going to go a little bit gray, right? Let me. So it is going to pretty much desaturate that area. So if there's a ton, I mean, you can go into Photoshop and you can easily add color back to that. And then down here for the green amount, and I'm going to really crank that so you can see as I drag this hue slider over, you can see it disappear there and then reappear as I go past it. So probably about right there. When you do that, make sure that you check other areas in your photo that may have similar colors to make sure that it's not pulling images away from the edges of the colors that are supposed to be there. So make sure to look at chromatic aberration in your images. That usually will happen when there's a strong backlight, right? And also, I would say the cheaper the lens too, but this was, what was this, the 28 to 70 f2 lens. It's not a cheap lens, so even expensive lenses will do it. But just make sure if there's any times where you're backlit, if you're shooting landscapes, maybe the leaves of the trees, that's a really good place to look for it. Something to be aware of, really simple tool. And then the other thing I might do is I'm going to darken the image just a little bit. I really like to use my adjustment brush. You can hit K and it will create a new adjustment brush, or you can just go click on your masking and hit brush. One thing that I did, because when Photoshop updated it, I'm like, what in the world is going on? Like, why is my adjustment brush acting so weird? It's not working right. It's because the auto mask button was clicked on. And so I would click and it would automatically mask out his face. I'm like, I do not like that. And it was kind of driving me nuts because I wanted just like a really gradual gradient going away. And so anyway, if you want to turn the auto mask off, I hate having it on. And I'm just going to bump up my exposure on him, you know, a little bit, maybe around a half stop. And that way, again, I'm kind of guiding the viewer to where I want them to look. So now they're viewing more right here. Your eye is most likely going to go to the brightest point of the photo or the part of the photo with the most contrast. And so I'm just trying to guide viewers there without them feeling or knowing that's what I'm doing. You're just a gentle guide. So a little before or after. And then again, I'm going to crop. So elements that to me are a little bit more distracting. This is kind of bright and contrasty over here. I don't know if there's a hinges or whatever, maybe a little bit of the stool. So I'm just going to crop a little bit of those out. I'm going to put his head in the third, maybe over just a little bit more. And then the other thing that's distracting to me is up here. And again, it depends on the context and the use of the image, right? If this is for marketing purposes, I'm gonna edit this thing, like I'm gonna really fine tune it. But if it's for more like documentary or a news story, then you know you got to leave it. So I'm just gonna go up, and this is where your healing brush, or we can try the content aware. The content aware should work pretty good right here. So just trace the outlet, and it's gone, and it looks pretty good. Oh, missed the board. So let's go back. So I'll just finish getting that. And there's a little piece, but you guys get the idea. All right. Last one we'll talk about. Any questions so far? again? We good, Donovan? Any questions, comments? Any other really good?
Everybody
Oh.
loved the geometry tool that you showed, and then everybody has also loved, let's see, what is it? So the geometry tool was great, and then the content aware tool was awesome as well.
Yeah, geometry tool, man, especially, yeah, it's changed. It's changed a lot for me. I love that thing. Again, you got to be careful. You don't want things too distorted, right? If you're shooting at a really wide angle from down low and you use it to straighten everything out, it's going to look kind of weird. So just use your discretion when you're using it. But if it's just to make things more symmetrical, especially if there's patterns or grids, like, man, it's so great. All right, last image. So ballet dancer in the library. So this one, it was shot. So it's indoors, back behind me. It's early morning. You can kind of see the reflection of the natural light coming through. So it's really blue. You have fluorescent lights up in the ceiling. So I used color correction gels to color correct for the fluorescence. So the lighting in this situation looks more natural and there's not like too much mixed light. We have a little bit with the outside light coming in. But we'll kind of talk about that a little bit. So I'm gonna, straighten the horizon because for whatever reason, I always shoot crooked and I can never seem to get it right. Or again, you can use the geometry tool and I'm just gonna draw the guides. So I'm just gonna pick, straight lines. Hopefully this desk is straight. And then I'm gonna pick the wall over here. And so you can see kind of the before and after, just straightening it up. And then again, my basic go-to, add some contrast. And I don't want to bring the highlights down too much in here. It's just a little bit. Do want to bring the shadows up, maybe my exposure up a little bit. And then I do still feel like it's kind of warm. I'm going to bring my temperature down. And well, let's try the color picker. I'm just curious to see how, if we just select that. See, in this situation, kind of makes it too cool. If you do all of it, it's a little too green. Maybe we'll just bring the magentas up a little bit. Man, I don't like any of that. No, look, wrong one. So let's go back to as shot. And I'm just going to manually do it. Kind of where, so I'm kind of mostly just looking at her skin tones. So from there, here's another good thing, content aware. Sometimes this happens. And she even said, she's like, hey, can you take care of this? So absolutely. So with the ribs, that's really hard to do. We're just going to do a quick content aware just to see how it does. And for the most part, that's pretty good. Like you can take it up in Photoshop and fine tune it, but trying to match those ribs and the motion of it is pretty difficult. So from here, see, I want to brighten up the background a little bit, but then she feels a little bit too overexposed. So this is where it's really cool. So let's go to select or people automatically detect. So look right here. So I highlight person 1. So down in this corner, it automatically picked her out. Person 2 automatically masked her out. Person 3, it kind of got both of these guys in the foreground. She's person 4, person 5, person 6. So I mean, it does pretty good at automatically detecting multiple people in the image. And she's still a little bit like, we're going to click on her, person 4. The other cool thing is you can just select the face. You can just select the body and skin, just the lips, the teeth, just the hair. So you can kind of fine tune different elements of this. I'm going to do the entire person, create that mask. Now, obviously, let's go back. So you can see it kind of bled over a little bit. You're in the light right here. So kind of as Donovan was showing earlier, you can get your brush And let's take the feather down. And I'm not going to really spend a ton of time doing this, but you guys get the idea, right? You can just go through and refine your selection and take the time. I think this part is easier in Photoshop to do. I don't think you can shift click on. Oh, you can. Oh, you guys, I just learned something great in here. All right, so you can click once and then hold down shift and click again and it will draw a straight line. I do that in Photoshop all the time when I'm selecting. I didn't realize you could do it in here. So that's beautiful. That makes going around edges so much faster.
Nate, I also don't know if you know this, but like, so let's say if you're refining your mask a little bit and you lob off too much of your mask, you can hold down the option key and it'll bring up the opposite. So if you're subtracting, you hold down option, you can add it back in and repaint it in.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Or you can, you know, if you really mess it up, there are ways to fix it without having to delete your mask and redo the whole thing all over again.
Perfect. See, I'm loving this. I'm learning a lot, even just doing this. So anyway, I'm not going to go through and refine it all, but you guys get the idea. So then from here, oh man, see, and I got to figure out all the fine tuning stuff. I want to see my frame more. Go back to my mask. And I'm just going to bring the exposure of her down just a little bit. The other thing that's nice too, let's say that you did shoot this and the color temperature was off, right? So you didn't use color correcting gels. And so she's going to be a lot more blue than the rest of the environment. You can go down here and you can adjust your color temperature just on her. So you can color correct. You can change your color temperature just on the subject. So if there's a subject in there that you lit, now this is, okay, this is just my opinion, but I feel like, okay, this is the lazy way to do it. Just do it right in camera. But if for whatever reason you weren't able to, this is a great thing to fall back on because you can go and you can fix the white balance for just that subject that you photographed. All right. So I'm going to go to probably my HSL sliders again. And maybe I'll take down the saturation of just those oranges there. Maybe the blues in here I'll take down a little bit. And my contrast back up. Maybe a little bit of vibrance. Probably a little bit too much purple up in those pillars. So you can go to the hue. Let's see if we make it a little bit cooler, warmer. Yeah. Maybe we'll do the saturation up there too, just a little bit. And then it kind of eliminates some of the mixed light that you have in here. And then bring that up a little bit more. And that's, I think that's pretty much it. Do we have any other questions? I mean, I know that we talked a little bit about some of the new features, the masking, the power that has. I think one of the things I want to mention too, and I didn't prepare this, but hopefully everyone understands batch processing. Donovan kind of went through it with his product shots. He batch processed the mask. If you're in a situation where, like for example, a basketball game, right? You're in a controlled area, the white balance is the same, the camera settings are the same. Edit one photo, like let's say edit right here. You can shift click or command A, select all the photos. And then I do option S and you can sync all of your settings across the board. And so all of your images, I mean, that saves you tons and tons of time. So it's about being efficient, right? I would say 95% of my work is just camera raw. Rarely do I open up images into Photoshop. I mean, there's specific things that I will do in there, or if I really want to fine tune one image, not like 300 images or even 20 images. If I'm just trying to fine tune and really get detailed into, a handful of images, then I'll pull it up into Photoshop and I'll take my time there. But for the most part, I'm just trying to get done. I'm just trying to be fast, be efficient. And Photoshop has been doing some awesome things to help us in that process. So do we have any questions, comments before we close? Been kind of quiet, but that's okay.
Mike just wants to make sure that the recording will be up later because he missed the first half.
Yes, the recording will be up later. I'm not sure exactly when, but it will be up on the YouTube page.
I just want to say thank you, Nate and Donovan. What Michael just said in the chat, me an hour ago, I knew Camera RAW really well. Me now, I know nothing. Learned so many things, just like stuff that I've like seen, but I haven't either touched or just a different way of doing some things. It was really cool to see y'all's process, and thank you guys for sharing.
Awesome, Chelsea. Well, glad it was helpful. I'll be honest, like preparing for this, I'm like, I need to go back on Adobe and just kind of see what all the updates were. So there's a lot of stuff that I learned in the process that I'm not, especially like we went over the ISO adaptive preset. That's where I learned about it. I'm like, are you kidding me? This is amazing. And so that's like, for me personally in my workflow, that's one of the biggest takeaways. But no, thank you. I'm glad it was helpful. Any questions? Oh, we have one from David. Use a geometry tool. Can you batch process that? Yeah, I believe you can. Yep, you can go in and pick what specific things that you do want to apply to your batch process. So you can just do color temperature. You can just do the masking. You can just do the geometry. So all of your drop downs on the side, you can pick and choose which one of those you want to or don't want to sync.
With that, in addition, if you want to sync masks across your images, when you click the masking option, if you want to sync it with your photos, you can actually put a little drop arrow down and you can select which masks you want to sync for each photo. So if you have 5 masks on an image and you know mask 1 is a nice linear gradient mask and you want that to apply to everything, you don't have to have all 5 masks sync across every image. You can have just 1 or 2 sync for everything. You can be very selective about what you sync for your photos, which is awesome.
Great. Love it. Thanks, Donovan. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, thanks, guys. Hopefully it was helpful, and we will see you for the next one. Have a
Thank
good one.
you.
Thanks, y'all. Good to see everyone.